Hi, and welcome to Code Corner. This is a video series we do at Mayfield Renewables to talk about codes and standards as they relate to the solar and solar plus storage industries. And today I'm going to focus in on some residential applications of code, and specifically in the International Fire Code. We've gone through and we've had some previous videos where we talked about International Fire Code and some residential specific things, some intro to it. So if you needed to go take a look at that, highly encourage that. But today I'm going to talk about locations for energy storage systems, and I'm going to talk about both the International Fire Code and NFPA 855. And I'll throw up the language for both of them for you so you can see it and understand. So International Fire Code, a lot of you are probably under that as your code that you are installing to, and so that would be the code language that you're using. And then there's a lot of folks out there that are using NFPA 855, which is a standard, so not necessarily a code, but a standard for energy storage installation, and gives us a lot of good information on how to do the installations. The language in both it's very, very similar. There's really some nuanced differences. They're really getting to the same point. They're really getting to the same end. But I just kind of want to point it out in case you happen to be using both of them or just one or the other, kind of going through those and setting that up. And again, this is specific for residential applications for what we're going to talk about in this video. And we have other videos talking about non-residential applications for the locations of energy storage systems. All right, so let's take a look start off in the IFC, so 1207.11. And this is the .11 is for your R3 and R4 occupancies within section 1207. So that's our residential applications. So the .11 gives it away that we're talking about residential applications. The other sections within IFC are for general installations for other than residential applications. But 1207.11.3 talks about the location of our energy storage systems, where we can actually install these systems. There's a lot of code language here. I realize I'm not going to read it for you verbatim, so if you'd like to take a pause on the video, read through the entire thing. I want to kind of walk through the major parts of it though, and kind of what the application of these are. So number one just talks about we can put these in detached garages or accessory structures. So if you have some sort of structure that's separated from the building, you can put your energy storage in there, and that's allowed by International Fire Code. The number two there is an interesting one, and so we can put ESS in attached garages, and what this section is saying is we need to make sure that we are separated from the dwelling units per the International Building Codes, that's section 406 3.2. And if you go look at the IBC 406 3.2, there's a dwelling unit separation part of that talks about specifically garages separation from dwelling units. And what they're really saying is that we have to have some gypsum board. We need to have a fire barrier between the garage, that attached garage, and that dwelling unit. So we're creating this space, or we're creating this differentiation from the garage and the dwelling unit, and so that's an important thing. And we're going to look at that further when we get into some more of these requirements down here. In 406.3.2, there's not just the gypsum board requirement for the walls. It actually goes into and talks about if you have dwelling units above the garage as well. So it's kind of trying to take in most possible scenarios. And so there's some requirements if you happen to have dwelling units above that get into what that requirement is. But then there's also requirements that talk about door openings between the garage and the dwelling unit. So there are actually some requirements for that actual door, and fire ratings on the door, how it's constructed, that it is self-closing, self-latching. So basically there's some requirements there. So that's one that you should be aware of if you're putting these inside of a garage. That door, that entry door into the dwelling unit, may also need to get replaced because of these requirements. The number three there, this is one I've talked with a lot of people. It's come up a lot, especially as of late it seems. But the requirement that if we put our ESS on the exterior side of the wall, we have to have a minimum of 3 feet from doors and windows directly entering the dwelling unit. So this is the kind of that one that you need to think about. directly entering the dwelling unit. And I'm going to show you an image here coming up after this to kind of help visualize this. But number 2 talks about this separation of a garage from the dwelling unit. And so we need to be thinking about, well, what are those windows and doors? Where are they entering? Are they entering the garage? Are they entering the dwelling unit? Are they entering some, defining where those are? So if you have ESS and you have windows or doors that are directly entering that dwelling unit, then that would be the requirement that you have to maintain that 3-foot separation from those windows and doors. And then number 4 is the one that I think gets a lot of attention, and unfortunately is definitely open to some interpretation, and have been talking with people about this, trying to see how folks are interpreting this. But you can see that we have these locations where we can install it, and the second sentence in there talks about if you have unfinished wood frame construction, then you have to provide this 5/8 inch Type X gypsum board to protect the interior of that structure. Now, what you see there, it says walls and ceilings of this unfinished wood frame construction. So not really telling us, is that just directly behind the energy storage? Is that the entire room? The prevailing wisdom, or the prevailing interpretations on this, is it's the location, the room in which those batteries or the ESS is being installed. So if you're putting it inside a unfinished garage, be prepared to be finishing that garage with that gypsum board. I know that's not necessarily an easy thing or a low cost solution, but that would be the most conservative approach on looking at what that requirement is. It doesn't say anything about a distance away from the ESS or anything like that. It's just saying walls and ceilings. So it's being pretty open-ended, pretty broad about what those are. So that's what I've been seeing and hearing from people as talking with different AHJs and things like that across the country. Some people as they're getting those interpretations. So the image here that I wanted to show you, we use this image a fair amount, but in residential applications, we do have this, and what I want to focus in on is those units that are installed on the outside, that we have a 3-foot minimum separation from windows and doors that are directly entering that dwelling unit. The 3-foot separation between the units, we've talked about that in other videos, size and separation. We have some videos on that, so we really dive into that. But for this one, I just wanted to help illustrate where that 3 feet would be for those units that are directly entering the dwelling units. Now, I did want to take a moment to talk about NFPA 855. That also has locations. Chapter 15 within 855 is the residential section. So that's the equivalent of 1207.11, where it gets specific about residential applications. And so you can see here, if you read through this, language is almost identical. It's very, very similar. The intent and the result is really the same. What I wanted to point out is, just take a moment, is on that last one where we have it highlighted, or we have it circled there. And this is about that gypsum board, about putting that Type 5/8 inch Type X gypsum board. And the way 855 was written, this is 2023 language. It's always, if you don't, it's confused, can be confusing. So it says, if the ESS is to be installed in not finished or non-combustible, if the room or space is not finished or not non-combustible, the walls or ceilings shall be provided. So the way that that's written can be a little confusing, because it can make it seem like that the non-combustible section is a little bit backwards, but it's saying is if it's not a finished room or if it's not non-combustible. So language was a little bit off there, but the intent was, if we don't have some sort of fire barrier in there, you're going to put one in. IFC, the language was, I would say, a little bit more clear. And again, the intent and the direction really is the same on both of those. All right, so that's going to cover the location section for IFC and residential applications. Highly encourage you to take a look at our website. We have a lot of courses available on different topics: National Electrical Code, Fire Code, all those different types of things, applications. So really would encourage you to take a look at that and see if there's somewhere that we can help you on your education. And then finally, if you have questions or comments, love to hear from folks. Here's our information. You can reach out directly to us. If there's a topic you want to hear about in the future, or if you have a question about this one specifically, by all means, let us know. Love to hear from you, and we'll see you in the next Code Corner.